All right, welcome to this episode of Mathmeatics. Today we're going to talk about using the quadratic formula. So far, we've learned to solve quadratic equations by factoring, and when we're factoring, we're going to take the products of C that add up to the B value. Okay, in terms of our standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, now we've also learned by taking the square roots. We've also learned to solve quadratics by completing the square. This creates a perfect square trinomial in which we can take the factors of and get a perfect square binomial. Okay. Some of these quadratics are not factorable. That means that we cannot take the square roots and we cannot factor, there's no product of C that will add up to B. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a solution in the real number system. That means that we could potentially either solve it by completing the square, and completing the square leads directly to the quadratic formula, which in a separate video, if you care to watch it, I will prove how completing the square factors from and creates from a standard form quadratic and creates the quadratic formula. I'm not going to do it in this video. So the quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, as go back to some of the discussions that we've talked about, this expression in the radicand, that is our discriminant. And when we talk about choosing which method to use, because now we have all these tools in our toolbox, and we look at a quadratic equation and we want to decide, well, what method is going to be the best method to use, okay? That's part of our decision-making process in order for us to quickly identify what method is going to make us be able to solve our equation the fastest, okay? Now, in standard form, our A here, if I look at this, our A is equal to 1, our B is equal to negative 5, and our C is equal to negative 36. The other thing is that when you're identifying the values of A, B, and C, you want to put your quadratic equation in standard form, okay? Now, all I'm going to do, and I'm not going to do this every time, but for the first couple of problems, I'm going to do it just because I want you to see it. I'm going to put placeholders because the biggest mistake y'all are going to make with using the quadratic formula is you're going to make a sign error, okay? So x is equal to negative blank plus or minus the square root of blank squared minus 4 times blank all over 2 times blank. Okay, so let's put in our values. So our b is negative 5, so we said it's negative 5. So I'm going to put all the places, the blanks that I have b, I'm going to put negative 5. And then a is 1, so all the blanks where a should be, I'm going to put 1. And then lastly, c is negative 36. Okay. So here's where you're going to make your sign mistakes, and you want to make sure that you're paying attention to PEMDAS. Okay? So think about what's happening with our group and the situation underneath the radicand. We know it's pretty obvious with the negative 5. Negative times a negative is going to give us positive 5. So we know that's going to be x is equal to positive 5. We're going to have plus or minus the square root. PEMDAS says exponents first, so that means I need to deal with that negative 5 squared. Note that negative 5 is in parentheses. That means that that's negative 5 twice. So negative 5 times negative 5 is going to give me positive 25. So that means that this b value here, whenever you square it, it should always, always, always give you a positive answer. That's that square. Because a negative times a negative is always going to give you a positive. Now, think about what's happening to this group right here. Okay? We have subtraction there, but between negative 4 and 1 and negative 36, we're actually adding that whole term to the 25. Okay? So essentially this is like saying plus, and then negative 4 times 1 times negative 36. Okay? So you have multiplication happening in there. Okay? That's like saying A times b times c. Or, I mean, think about what it says. It says negative 4ac. That's negative 4 times a times c. So I want to make sure and get rid of, that's negative 4 times negative 36. So a negative times a negative is going to be a positive. And don't just put it in your calculator, because if you don't put it in your calculator correctly, the calculator isn't going to know how to do it. You have to understand the relationship that's happening with this group of numbers, okay? That's really, really important understanding. So I know that that's going to become plus. 4 times 1 is 4, and then 4 times 36 is going to give me 144. Okay, so this is going to be 25 plus 144 all over 2. Okay, now I'm going to simplify this. Oops, went too far. So that's going to give me 5 plus or minus 25 plus 144 gives me 169. So that's going to be the square root of 169 over 2. Okay, now the square root of 169 is a perfect square of 13. So this is going to be 5 plus or minus 13 over 2. Now, keep in mind, when I get to this point where x is equal to 5 plus or minus 13 divided by 2, I'm not done here. I have to simplify it all the way. This is saying x is equal to 5 plus 13 all over 2, or x is equal to 5 minus 13 over 2. Okay? 5 minus 13 over 2 is going to give me negative 4. 5 plus 13 over 2 is going to give me positive 9. So x is equal to negative 4, 9. Okay, let's do another problem. Let's do x squared minus 8x is equal to 20. Now again, I'm going to put this in standard form. So this is going to be x squared minus 8x minus 20 is equal to 0. Okay, my a is equal to 1, my b is equal to negative 8, and my c is equal to negative 20. Okay, so that's going to be x is equal to negative blank plus or minus the square root of blank squared minus 4 times blank all over 2 times blank. So our b is negative 8, so I'm going to put negative 8. Our a is 1, so I'm going to put 1 and 1, and then our c is 20. So this is going to give me x is equal to positive 8 plus or minus the square root of 64. Now, plus, because we have a negative and a negative, 80. All over 2. 64 plus 80 gives me 144. So x is equal to 8 plus or minus the square root of 144 over 2. Now, you should recognize 144 because that's a pretty low perfect square. That's a perfect square of 12. So x is equal to 8 plus or minus 12 divided by 2. Now, again, so make sure you're going to say 8 plus 12, which gives me 20, divided by 2 gives me 10. So this is going to be 8 plus 12 divided by 2, or 8 minus 12 divided by 2. So 8 plus 12 divided by 2 is going to give me x is equal to 10. And then 8 minus 12 divided by 2 is going to give me negative 2. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you use the quadratic formula.